the Wheat Ridge Police Department. So this is our 50th anniversary year, and we wanted to kick it off right here in January with a kind of celebration. I think you'll see events all year long, kind of working up towards Carnation Festival in August, when we really celebrate that, the founding of the city. So I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel here. Here's our 50th anniversary and logo there. And first, of course, they didn't sit in the proper order. They don't follow directions very well.
Didn't tell us, did he?
But first off, let me introduce Kent Higgins. Kent was a reserve police officer in it was about 1970 when he started. But prior to that, he was one of the original organizers of the incorporation for the city of Wheat Ridge. So he's got a lot of information that he can talk to us about. Kent, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little something about you?
Thank you, Jim. Apparently there were 4 incorporators for the city of Wheat Ridge. They were all from the fire department. In fact, Ed Anderson, the first mayor, he was from the city also, and on the fire department. And we were the ones that basically filed the incorporation papers for the city of Wheat Ridge. And our goal was to beat Jefferson City or Lakewood, because Lakewood included us in their incorporation boundaries. And Wheat Ridge and Lakewood had this unbelievable rivalry against each other forever. And we wanted to maintain our own identity as a community, and so we beat filing for incorporation Lakewood by a week.
All right, so now you're doing the spoiler alert for us. So tell us what you've been doing for the last 50 years and what you're doing right now.
I'm retired, finally. Came to Wheat Ridge in '49 with my folks. Went to Mountain View Elementary. Then, because Reed Street or Stevenson or whatever you call it didn't exist, it was being built. Graduated from Wheat Ridge High School in '63. Good old farmer. My dad had a drugstore. That's the reason why we moved out here. In '49, he started Western Drug, which is now in the same building that is Wheat Ridge Cyclery, right on 38th and High Court. And that was his business there until end of '69. Lived at 3880 Newland Street, smack dab in the middle of Wheat Ridge, and then later on down at 45th and Upham, close to Howard. Howard and I go back to high school, went to CU, got too many degrees. I've worked 30 years for the feds, worked in private industry in the state. I've taught at Mines, CU, and DU. Also taught community college for fire service courses. So, done a lot of stuff in my life I never thought I would. I've really enjoyed life and look forward to whatever happens tomorrow or the next day.
Thanks, Kent. So, this is Howard Jadinger. Howard Jadinger is also a retired reserve officer, and well, you went back maybe a little bit earlier, '69 and '70, and you're affiliated with the fire department. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, sort of like Kent, we lived in North Denver. My parents moved to Wheat Ridge in '52, and it was kind of interesting out here. It was kind of, I guess, a building boom because I was going to be in the 4th grade, and they had built Reed Street, but there wasn't enough room for the kids, so they put us up in the Wheat Ridge Grange over on between 38th and 39th on High Court for a year, and then somehow in 5th grade I got over to Reed Street, and then they built the new high school out on 32nd in '69. No, that's not right. 59, and so we went out there. My class was the second. We graduated in '60, so we were the second class to graduate from the new Wheat Ridge High School. I likewise went up to the University of Colorado and got a business degree, and worked 15 years for Blue Cross and Blue Shield in their sales department, and 18 and a half for Kaiser in their sales department. And just as a side note, it has nothing to do with the city of Wheat Ridge, but my chief associate, my other sales mate was Yvonne, now Higgins, and so I introduced Kent into his current wife. That's just a off the thing, but that wasn't one of the things I retired, and by God, it's worked really well. So
It was only 24 years ago.
So after that, when I retired from Kaiser, I joined a young lady, and we have a partnership in a health insurance consulting company that I'm still doing. Kind of when I feel like it, but no, we have a great bunch of people. So joined the fire department in '67, retired in somewhere in the '90s. Then I served 10 years on the board of directors for the Wheat Ridge Fire Protection District, and just living the good life like that and taking it a day at a time.
Thanks, sir. So right in the center, we got the youngster of the group.
Chief.
Is Chief Dan Brennan, our current Chief of Police. Chief's been here at Wheat Ridge since 2005. You want to tell us about yourself?
Thanks, Jim. So, Dan Brennan, I started my law enforcement career right out of college. I graduated from Metropolitan State College with a degree in criminal justice in 1976. I started work with the city of Lakewood in 1977. So, I got immersed in a lot of the stories in terms of Jefferson City and the subsequent elections that sort of formed our two cities. I worked at Lakewood for 27 years, rose to the rank of commander, worked in just about all of the operational administrative assignments that you could at that point. The chief that I had at the time, Ron Burns, lent me to the State Division of Criminal Justice for a year, where I got to run the Colorado Regional Community Policing Institute and a police corps program, which was essentially an academy program that would reimburse students who successfully completed the academy and were hired by other law enforcement agencies for all of their college expenses. So I did that for a year, wanted to be a police chief, and this position opened up, and I had a lot of people encourage me to put in for it, and got the phone call in November of 2004 and started January 3rd, 2005. It's been a great ride, great organization with Joe's assistants here to my right, and Division Chief Lawrence, Division Chief Pickett, and a lot of really good, solid, dedicated, and committed employees. We've been able to continue to move the needle in this organization and make it a nationally recognized organization. So I'm now getting close to entering my 42nd year in law enforcement. So it's been a great ride. It doesn't seem like it's been that long, although Jim reminded me that the picture that hangs outside in our lobby, that I look a lot younger in that picture than I do today. I don't know what that means, but I think it's a compliment, so we'll leave it right there. But thanks, Jim.
And over on the far end, we've got former Chief of Police, Howard Jakeway. We always called you Jake. And with another Howard on the board, we'll just continue to call you Jake or Chief. So tell us about yourself.
Well, yeah, there we go. Thanks, Joe. I always have to have somebody take care of me, with this technical stuff. Anyway, I came west starting, from Vietnam, where I had a all-expense courtesy of the U.S. Army for a year and a half. Went back to New York, moved to Minnesota. That wasn't far enough west. Moved from Minnesota to Colorado in 1969. And I was interested in law enforcement, always have been. I had applied in Minnesota and came out highly rated. As a matter of fact, number one in two different agencies in the Minneapolis area. Unfortunately, they have a strange application of VA experience there, and that is that I was not considered a veteran for purposes of veterans preference, and it was an absolute preference, which means that anybody that just barely passed the test and was a Minnesota resident at the time they entered service was considered a veteran and therefore was above me. So anyway, I moved out to Colorado and had a little place over on Pierce Street initially, and saw an ad for the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, and I thought, well, I think I'll apply for that. So I did, and I also had applied while I was looking at Arapahoe County and Denver County. Found out Denver County was not general law enforcement. And Jefferson County paid $578 a month, and Arapahoe County paid $563. So I took the Jefferson County position, and we were in our class for about, I think 3 or 4 weeks, and we were initially hired to augment the Sheriff's Department that was going to provide law enforcement in Wheat Ridge under a contract. And the contract fell through, and anyway, one day they came into our class and said, well, you're not going to be Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies, you're going to be Wheat Ridge police officers. And I said, well, several of us said, what's a Wheat Ridge? And I got the address for the city hall, and I went down and looked at it, and I thought, there isn't anything here. There's a little L-shaped shopping center. One thing led to another. I was transferred down here along with 7 other people in that class, and we augmented the Wheat Ridge Police Department so that when I started, we had 13 officers, counting the chief of police, and 1 secretary, and that was the Wheat Ridge Police Department staff. And one thing led to another, and I enjoyed taking tests, so they promoted me several times, and finally in 1982, the first chief of the department, Ed Pinson, retired, and I was selected after a process to be the police chief, and it was until 1988 when I'd gotten so heavily involved in police and fire pensions around the state that I was spending a goodly chunk of my time doing that, and thought, well, I'd better, in fairness to the city and with other agencies that tended to count on me for pension matters and that type of thing, I went to work in that field. And after a few years, I got back into law enforcement with the state Division of Parole and retired from there in 2002. Worked a few more jobs after that because the definition of retired, you have to break it down to understand it. It simply means retired. You're tired again. So I'm tired of getting tired, so I am totally retired at this point in time.
And you know, Jake, every quarter I thank you for the police pension program that was set up. I look at my statements, I say, yep. So then we've also got retired Division Chief Joe Casa. Joe has the distinction of being the longest tenured Wheat Ridge police officer. He was with Wheat Ridge for 42 years. And just retired a couple of years ago. So, Joe, you want to tell us about yourself?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, 3 years ago, I retired from Wheat Ridge with 42 years of service. My parents had bought a house in the area of 42nd and Newland when that subdivision first came in. And so I've been a long time Wheat Ridge resident. And wasn't long before my parents became really heavily invested in the community and was doing a lot of community-type services. One of them was helping build the school for St. Peter and Paul's school. And we were regular members at St. Pete's and Paul's, and it was, I learned how to work with different people within the community and understand what it was they did and why they did it. So I started school, and of course I went to St. Peter and Paul's, and in the second grade, I had the honor of being the first student ever to be expelled from the school. And my mom and dad were really happy about that. So they enrolled me at Martinson Elementary, and then about 6 months later, I was expelled from Martinson Elementary, and I guess I had a rough year, a couple years there as a little guy, and they said, well, we want to keep you in the neighborhood, so we went up to, it was Reed Street at the time, and with a lot of assistance and a lot of tutoring and somebody watching me 24 hours a day, I made it through Reed Street and went to Wheat Ridge Junior High, which was in the old Wheat Ridge High School building there at 38th and High Court. Went to Jefferson High School, graduated from there, and by then I'd learned to keep my mouth shut and whatever I felt inside to keep it there and not necessarily express it to like the principal, assistant principal, and the teachers. So once I started driving a car, every day I had the pleasure to be stopped by the Edgewater Police Department, and Duke Smith was the chief at the time, and so every day I'd drive the same route, and he'd be waiting at the same place, and he would stop me. So I kind of became interested in what police officers do, and so off to college. My mom was especially proud of me going to college, and it was really a pleasure for her to get me out of the house. And so I went to junior college down in Trinidad, got my liberal arts degree. Then I became known after that as a professional student within the family. And so they were really kind of getting used to me studying a lot and going to different schools. So I transferred to CU, spent some time at CU. Then I transferred to University of Northern Colorado, where I got my bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry. Received a teaching degree at the same time, so I began teaching at Arvada West High School. I'd been there for a couple years, and I decided, I think it's time to try that police work stuff. And so I put in applications. One of them was here at Wheat Ridge. So I started here at Wheat Ridge in December of '72, and I started in dispatch, and was there for about a year, and then promoted to patrol. And I've worked just about every assignment, every position within the department, held just about every rank within the department. And so I decided while I was working here at Wheat Ridge, it was time to go back to school. So I went to Metro State, got a bachelor's degree in criminology, and then I settled down to work here at Wheat Ridge. Once I got a little bit older, the education bug hit me again, so I went back to Regis University, where I studied conflict management, and my master's degree is in conflict management. I really enjoyed the police work and all that it had to offer, so I pretty much, and I loved Wheat Ridge. I basically was a Wheat Ridge boy, and I loved everything about the city, the people within the city. So, and I love the police department very much. So I worked there 42 years. It was a pleasure to do that. And so I'm into my third year of retirement, and I'm here to tell you retirement is absolutely awesome. It is awesome. It's I didn't know what to expect in retirement, but boy, I'll tell you, it was awesome. And I do a lot of things in retirement. This past year's been a little tough. Just a quick short of it, in February, a young man decided that a stop sign didn't apply to him, and he broadsided my wife and I as we were driving down 8th Avenue. As a result of the accident, I had a subdural hematoma on my brain, went through brain surgery, and so ended up at Spalding Rehab, spent a little bit of time there, and then was released to home. And I've pretty much been under house arrest at home, can't go too far away from home. I'm not able to drive or whatever, but I've only got 2 more years of recovery time. And so I'm looking forward to being able to drive again and really get back a lot of the skill sets that I lost in the accident. Up until the accident, retirement was awesome, I said, and I worked at Regis University teaching classes there. I was doing girls fast pitch softball. I enjoyed doing that, and several other kinds of activities to keep me busy. So I was really kind of shocked when Jim called me and asked me to participate in this panel. And it was a pleasure for me to do that. So thank you, Jim, for inviting me to spend a little time with the group tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. So I'm Jim Lorenz. I'm Division Chief here at Wheat Ridge. I've been here 37 years. And so I started in 81. And I've collected kind of bits and pieces of history along the way. So I really appreciate these guys coming in and talking to them. Just in the past couple of weeks, I've learned a lot more than I thought I knew it all. But there's some things I didn't know. So we're going to start talking about it. First off, here's 3 of these guys. If you can identify which one is which. So Jadinger here is the first one on the left. We've got Jake Way in the middle and Joe Casa on the other end of there. And I happen to have a picture of Jadinger and Kent Higgins there. They were in this picture that's in the newspaper in 1970. So that's, let's see, this is Ed Anderson. He's the first mayor of Wheat Ridge. And a reserve class in 1970. Here's Kent, and here's Howard Jadinger. So here's the close-up there. That's the only picture I've got of you, Kent.
Jack Prose is on the end, who was the
Yeah,
first
Jack Prose is there.
building inspector.
You became the first building inspector in Wheat Ridge, and Warren Usey is another guy I recognize in that group.
The guy on the left is Richie Rose. Any of you remember him? He was a firefighter. We also owned the A&W at 38th and Otis.
Yeah.
So our format tonight is kind of free form. I'm going to talk about some things. I want my panel to just jump in anytime they feel like it and add the color commentary. We'll ask them some questions. And towards the end, I want to talk about talk with Chief Brennan about what's been going on since 2005 and what the future looks like for the Wheat Ridge Police Department. So, and then you'll have some time to ask some questions if you want to jump in, if you start thinking of questions along the way. Whoops, I went too fast. There we go. So 1854 to 1861, the land that you are sitting in right now was the Kansas Territory. And of course, we didn't become the Colorado Territory until 1861. But you see the outline of the Colorado, what became the state of Colorado, and all the territories that were part of it. So in 1861, they decided let's make a Colorado Territory, and this is what Wheat Ridge looked like then. Of course, these pictures weren't taken in 1859, but both of these structures were built in 1859. This was what we call the Johnson Cabin. and it was located on Clear Creek, right at Wadsworth and Clear Creek, right down there where there's a park now. And this cabin was moved over to Historic Park at 46th and Robb, which is right next door to this structure. Anybody know what that is?
Saudi.
There you go. So I do this class for explorers and new people that come into the city of Wheat Ridge, and nobody can imagine somebody building a house out of sod. Or living in it. I can imagine the bugs. So let's talk about some of the early crime in Wheat Ridge. So October 26, 1860. So I went through a bunch of old newspapers, and I was kind of picked out the things that were mentioned. And this one was from the Denver Times. I don't know when that newspaper folded, but it says October 26, 1860, Charles Simpson stole 4 cans of peaches and a jar of pickles from a wagon in the Wheat Ridge area. So what we think that was down at Anderson Park there on the creek. There used to be a grist mill there back in those days. So all the way back before we're even a state, we have a pickle theft. The jury convicted Simpson for theft. Since there was no jail at the time, the sheriff, his name was Pollard, first sheriff of the Kansas Territory, he gave the suspect 20 lashes at a public flogging post and then banned him from the territory for life. So, and there's no indication that he was a reoffender. So in the 1860s, vice was really rampant. I think you know from the history of Denver. Wheat Ridge wasn't really a den of iniquity, but it suffered from common problems like Denver was home to large-scale prostitution, gambling, confidence games. You've heard stories about Maddie Silk. She was a famous prostitute, and a con man named Soapy Smith. So both of those characters ran crime rings along Sheridan from 26th Avenue, kind of in the Edgewater area, but here on the corner of Wheat Ridge. And they were finally run out of town, run out of Denver city limits. I'm going to jump up to March 7th, 1900, slot machines. So this one I just have to read it because it is, I think it's terribly entertaining. It is the Denver Times, March 7th, 1900, and the headline is, "Good deed well done, slot machine smashed." There is a justice of the peace over in Jefferson County who ordered a slot machine smashed yesterday, and the contents, 66 nickels, was turned into the school fund. W.W. Wilmore appeared before Justice of the Peace Thomas of Wheat Ridge yesterday and swore out a warrant against Simon Foster, a grocery man in the district, on the charge of running a gambling concern to entice nickels from school children by the use of a slot machine. So W.W. Wilmore, of course, ran Wilmore Nurseries and had a farm at 38th and Wadsworth, which ran all the way to 41st, a big farm over there. And we've got Wilmore Davis Elementary is over there. And, of course, Wilmore Nurseries is still in existence. But W.W. Wilmore was also a deputy for Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. So the court ordered the machine smashed with the result as stated, and Foster was bound over for trial in the District Court of Jefferson County on the charge of keeping a gambling apparatus. Let us do something to acknowledge the service of the Justice of the Peace. There was a trap designed to catch school children. In it were found 66 nickels representing many heartburn and disappointments at the result. But worse than that, they represent many holes punched in the moral fiber of the children of Wheat Ridge. Many lessons in gambling instilled in young minds on whose white pages the lessons of virtue and peace and knowledge written by the school teacher are blotted and blackened by the lessons of vice and unrest by the slot machine. It was a good deed well done when this machine was smashed, and there'll be little regret in Denver if a great many more go the same way. So,
We thought we had problems, right?
Right here in River City.
newspapers wrote good then. So now we're moving to 1916, January 1st, 1916. The 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution went into effect, which prohibited all intoxicating liquor. The first arrest was in Jefferson County for selling homemade moonshine was Frank Daniels of, you guessed it, Wheat Ridge. Most moonshiners were able to continue their operation by moving into remote areas of the foothills. Bootlegging was a common arrest in Jefferson County during this time. In 1925 alone, $12,000 was collected in fines from Jefferson County for alcohol violations. So pretty good business going at that time. Because of that, January 26, 1931, organized crime. So on this date, a large-scale undercover operation. 23 members of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department and Denver Police Department raided the La Palmart Roadhouse on West 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. I don't know what the cross street was. If anybody ever figures out where that roadhouse was, let me know. 25 suspects, including members of the Smaldone family, were in the roadhouse at the time, conducting an organized crime conference on fixing prices and determining distribution of liquor in Denver. All the subjects were arrested and charged. So big deal in Wheat Ridge at that time to get all of those crime figures taken care of. We're going to jump up to December 9th, 1956, Ray Isley. And I don't know if our board remembers Ray Isley. Ray was a Jefferson County deputy. He retired. And in Wheat Ridge at that time, there wasn't a lot of police presence. And that was one of the things that the residents of the area really wanted. They wanted to see more cops. And Ray saw this as an opportunity as a retirement job to start his own security business. So he drove up and down 38th Avenue and checked on businesses, and he was doing that on December 9th when he went to 38th and Ames. It's a pool hall now, but at that time it was a grocery. You guys remember that?
Grocery store, yeah.
Yeah. So it was called the Country Gentleman. It was a grocery store, and it was being robbed at the time that Ray pulled in. The bad guy that was robbing the store, he opened up the front door and he fired one round. It went through the windshield of Ray's car, hit him in the head, and killed him. And so we say that was the only law enforcement officer that had been killed in the line of duty in the city of Wheat Ridge. Now, Ray was not a police officer at the time, but we still kind of pay homage to that as for Ray. The backstory of that is the guy that did this escaped, went to Los Angeles, and was holed up in an apartment there. There was a guy named Jack Webb, if anybody knows who Jack Webb was, the TV show Dragnet. He was working on a script for Dragnet for TV. He was doing a ride-along with LAPD. He's riding with a detective sergeant who decided he would go up to the door of this apartment and, unarmed with his hands up, knock on the door and ask the guy to come out. Well, he did, and this detective sergeant arrested him. Jack Webb said that was the bravest man he'd ever seen. And so he patterned his character of Joe Friday after this guy. Wheat Ridge case. How about that? That is pretty amazing.
Well, he went on
Uh,
to, the
yeah,
Colorado Merchant
two
Patrol, that company went on to Ray Isley's company and was fairly successful until we could get some law enforcement on a little bit stronger basis. And
Up to the mic.
and on a stronger basis, and they continued to do dispatching for the fire department for a while out of the basement at the house on the southeast corner of 26th and Ames, I guess. And so they dispatched for the fire department, Colorado Merchant Patrol.
Called Colorado Merchant Patrol. And my dad, his store was, employed them. And one of their tricks was they had a small piece of paper they would fold in the door about so far from the ground. And they would go by and check the doors. And of course, if anyone had opened that door, then that piece of paper would drop down. And that was their clue. And it was the only law enforcement. In fact, Richie, who was the first mayor for Lakewood, his comment years and years ago when they first were incorporated was that for all of their area, they only had like 3 patrol units in that whole area of Lakewood prior to their incorporation, so it was really sparse for law enforcement.
So after Ray Isley died, the detective from Jefferson County was named Gene Bracey, and Gene bought the company from Ray Isley's family, and he developed that into became Denver Burglar Alarm. Became a really big business, and then it was finally sold to one of the other burglar alarm companies. It's national now, but that was a huge business at that time. So we just started to talk about incorporation. So why? Wheat Ridge has been around since 1859, and why did it decide to incorporate? So, panel, what do you think?
Well, it was, I guess it was just to survive. Everybody was pretty happy in Wheat Ridge the way things were going, as far as I know. And, we had all basically services. Jefferson County Sheriff had some cars in the area, the sanitation district, the fire department, the water department, everything was working. But Denver started a little encroachment down there, and if you most of you probably know, down around, I don't know, south, whatever, Denver actually incorporated a part of Jefferson County, and that concerned some people down in the Lakewood area. So they just decided to hold an incorporation effort and included Wheat Ridge. And as Kent mentioned, it was pretty good rivalry, and I don't know, especially us on the fire department, we didn't want any part of Lakewood. So it basically boiled down to just survival of the Wheat Ridge area, it was known. So one night at the fire department, there's about 8 of us sitting around, and Chief Willis said, and we had Ed Anderson, thank God, he was an attorney, said, let's try something. Ed said, I'll draw up the papers, and we'll beat them to the polls. We knew that we could beat them to the polls by 1 week, 7 days. And we went out into the community, and was asked the other day by a reporter or something, well, what was in it for you? And basically it was just, to keep the area of Wheat Ridge and not go to Jefferson City. So the one kind of unusual fact was that if you look at the map of Wheat Ridge, I think Ed, when he was drawing it, he wanted to just basically do Sheridan, take out Mountain View, 26th, take out the little Edgewater stuff, take out the cemetery and just run out 26th down Youngfield. Why he crossed over into North Wheat Ridge up there around Jolly Rancher, I don't know. I always thought we should just draw it down the creek because that's where the fire departments are, Arvada and Wheat Ridge separated. But you'll notice up on the south end, the area that I know as Applewood Knolls is carved out. And the reason they got carved out is we had a meeting one night, an informational meeting at the high school, and it was just overwhelming that these people in the Applewood Knolls area did not want to be incorporated. And so the next morning, Ed said, whoa, it's going to be a close vote. Let's just draw the boundaries and take them out. And he did. And so Applewood Knolls, if you look, we were just kind of weird there. It goes around and it comes back out to 26th. Unfortunately, a week later, they were incorporated into the city of Lakewood. So that was, you know, I'm glad that the Wheat Ridge Fire Department was about the only organization that had any structure and had a few funds in the social fund, and I guess just the foresight to take that up upon themselves. And it was a great victory.
There were three organizations basically in Wheat Ridge: the fire department, which was the strongest, the Grange, the Wheat Ridge Grange, which was on High Court, but that was more of the agriculture agrarian past of Wheat Ridge, and then the Merchants Association. And the Merchants Association was along 38th Avenue, which wasn't much. I mean, there were probably 20 merchants in that. Their big thing was to give away a few turkeys at Thanksgiving in a drawing. But the fire department had representation from the whole area. At least for our fire protection district, there was also Prospect Valley to the west that eventually came into the Wheat Ridge Department. But we seemed to be the heartbeat for the community. We also wanted to try and maintain a community where we were a small neighborhood community. You looked at Lakewood at that time, and I mean, you ran up and down Colfax in your wonderful cars, and you went to the drive-ins, and you had theaters and roller skating rinks, you know, and so on. And you came over to Wheat Ridge, and it was nice and quiet, you know, nice and quiet. And in reality, I think a lot of people did not want the lifestyle of Lakewood to come into Wheat Ridge. And we were famous for what? We were famous for, you know, truck farms. You know, one of the greatest things we were famous for was celery, in addition to carnations. You know, and all of that has passed, and I think that might be one of the reasons why Ed drew the boundary farther to the north, because that whole valley area along Clerk Creek was irrigated, and that was all truck farming at that time. And so maybe he included it that way because that was the tradition, that was the history of Wheat Ridge.
The other thing was that that area of Jefferson City was so huge, as Kent mentioned. As we said at the fire department one night, we said, boy, we're going to be nothing. We'll just look at the size of that. We will have, sure, we'll have a council person or something, but we won't be represented. And the week after we incorporated, Lakewood incorporated and became the third largest city in the state of Colorado overnight. That's how big it was.
Yeah, to
Without
give
Wheat Ridge.
a comparison, you know, Lakewood ended up with 100,000 people. Wheat Ridge had like 20, 25 at that time. If we would have had 100% turnout in voters, you have 100,000 voting against you or voting in favor of corporate, you can't outvote them. It was impossible. And that was the reality. That was the brick wall that we ran into and we looked at and said, can we in fact make a difference? And boy, it was a leap of faith. But that's why we have Wheat Ridge.
So the history of Wheat Ridge was the settlers were, or the, I guess you'd say, prospectors going to get gold and silver up in the mountains, and some people stopped and had farms here. They found out that it was easier to make money, and not an easy life by any means. It was easier to make money as a farmer selling these vegetables and fruits to the miners than to get gold and silver. Some of them got lucky and got rich, but not very many of the miners. So the real money was in growing food, and that's why Wheat Ridge kind of developed in its history as farmers. So, you know, in 1962, like you're talking about, that was the first attempt of Denver to try to annex to the west, and the people of Wheat Ridge fought that off. But they knew that it came again in 66. They fought it off again. Then Jefferson City comes along, and Wheat Ridge decides, you know, if we want to maintain our identity, we're going to have to beat them and incorporate ourselves. So that and they wanted better law enforcement. So we plug ourselves here in the police department that because there wasn't a lot of law enforcement presence, that there was only one car that Jefferson County would run in this area, and it wasn't necessarily 24/7. They wanted better law enforcement. So that's kind of why the incorporation. And it kind of culminated in the summer of '69, although I know you'd been working on it prior to that, but let's, this is just kind of to get you in the mood of what was going on in 1969. So this, of course, is the President of the United States. He's the one on your left. And we also had the Vietnam War going on that Jake's talked about. We spent a year and a half there. That was going on. On July 20th, 1969, remember this?
Sure.
This is Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. So that is exactly 1 month before the incorporation of Wheat Ridge on August 20th. So now we know exactly what was going on. How about this guy?
Oh,
Charles Manson, and the Manson murders took place August 10th, 10 days before the city of Wheat Ridge incorporated. Anybody know what that is?
Woodstock.
So they say, anybody that knows Woodstock wasn't there.
That's right.
But that was
Yvonne might have been. No?
She was too
no?
young.
August 15th to the 18th, 2 days
Yes.
before the city of Wheat Ridge incorporates was Woodstock. So now we all know where we are in history. This is August 20th, 1969, Wheat Ridge. So Kent mentioned something about this logo, so you can tell that story.
Actually, it's not as much the logo, but initially Ed wanted me, the mayor pro temp, actually at that time, said, if we're going to have a police department, we need stationery. And if we're going to make stationery, we need a letterhead. And so he looks at me and he says, make a letterhead. Well, so I went home with my drafting tools, and remember those old, you're too young, those two, but you had press-on letters that you could rub on, because typesetting didn't exist, in a home. And computers didn't exist, PCs didn't exist, nothing existed out there. And so the only rub-on letters I had were this flowing cursive letters. And so I made a Wheat Ridge Police Department letterhead with flowing cursive letters, which was on the vehicles for years, just prevailed. And it still kind of prevails with the city's name and this logo. But where you see Wheat Ridge on the screen, that was the actual typeface of those letters, those flowing letters,
Now the city seal, that was designed by a senior at the high school,
yeah.
at that time. I don't have his name handy, but he drew that up and won a contest to design the seal for Wheat Ridge. What Kent is talking about on that car is
There you go.
about the best picture I have. So it's not the first car. This is a 1988 where we went to this design. And I know this because I designed this car. So I haven't told Kent this yet, but we had a contest here at the police department, design the next patrol car. And I was looking at that stationery that Kent had designed, and I said, we ought to just put that font on the side of the car. So 1988 is when we started doing that, and we had that for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years we ran that car. So let's talk about police buildings. Come on. It's not advancing for me. There you go. So here's what I thought was the first municipal building, and I was wrong. This is what it looks like now. these were the original Jefferson County officers that were hired at Wheat Ridge. So this is the first. There's not. I don't know why we keep losing this. There's not 9. There's 9 of them, but they're not all in this picture. This is Jack Bramble over here.
Yep.
And I always thought that this was the first municipal building because I remember hearing people talk about being in the basement of the building. This is the building today. But this was just the parking lot that they used. So, I think we're on a timer. So the real city offices were. We're here. So Kent took this picture of the first city of Wheat Ridge offices. I went over there yesterday and took this picture. It's a barber shop now, but you can see it's exactly this is the spot where the city offices were. This is where the second municipal building was, and it's over at 38th and Newland. So that was the other, there it is today. This was the other thing that I didn't realize is this is just where the police department was. That city offices stayed where they were until 1977, and moved into this building.
Yeah, the building was owned by Tom Braden, my dentist. And of course, I lived on Newland Street, just down the street, and I got wind that his basement, he didn't use it. And so I told Lois Turner that. And Lois jumped on with Jerry Malone, and they negotiated a lease with Braden, and they leased that, and that became the home for many, many years. And boy, it was tight.
So, Jake, Joe, what do you remember about that building?
Well, yes. If you look on the right of the picture, we had the upstairs on the right. The other was the doctor's office and something else at one time. And then we had, dispatch was in the back of that, records was in the front, and then downstairs you had the chief's office and one other room, and then we expanded and we got another room downstairs. So that we actually had, and then dispatch moved down to there. But that was the, well, what would that be? The third police offices, yes. The original office was one desk in the corner of the city council chambers at the bottom of that other building that you showed, which was, I think, the Empire Bank, I believe. And that's where it originally was. And then we moved upstairs and had all of the lockers, and the chief had a desk in one corner and the secretary in the other.
Joe, you dispatch out of that building?
I dispatched out of that building. During the one summer, I dispatched graveyards, and the whole building was left open. There was no air conditioning. So we left all the doors open, left the windows open. And one evening about 3 o'clock in the morning, there was had a big window that I could see out into the lobby area of the building as you went in the front door. Next to that was a series of steps down into the basement. And I heard some noise going on, and it was really interesting. The chief at the time said, well, you know, for your safety, if you have a gun, bring it to work, and if anybody comes in the police department that you don't know, just go ahead and shoot them. And so I took his advice, and I brought in a gun, and so I heard this noise going on, and all of a sudden, directly in front of me at the window, this head starts rising up. And it was kind of like the Charlie Manson head, you know? And I got really excited about that, so I drew the gun. And all of a sudden, this man stands up and he's screaming, "Don't shoot me, don't shoot me." Turned out to be one of the undercover detectives from the task force that was in play at that time. And his name was Dennis Babini.
God.
And all of you know, there's a lot of us in here that know Dennis Babini. So he was scared that I was going to shoot him, and so in the meantime, while he's rising real slowly, letting himself be known, I keyed the mic and said a few words, and all the troops, maybe 3 of them, come running into the PD, and when they hit that front door, all they did was laugh. And so it turned out to be an undercover guy by the name of Dennis Babini.
Here's something that Kent brought to us. So I don't know where these pictures have never been around until this week.
Yep.
We just got these from Kent, and this is dispatch in that
Yes.
3805 Newland Street. I recognize Norm Forrestal
Yep.
as the officer, and I think the female is Pat Hopper. Is that right?
I believe so.
You think so? Yeah.
Super. All right.
And subsequently, she became the first female police officer in the city of Wheat Ridge.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And this is the Investigations Bureau.
Dan Ray.
This is Ed Ray over here. He was at Wheat Ridge for quite a long time. And I don't know who the other 2 are. I don't know if any.
On the-
Isn't that Fred Girk on the left?
No.
No, that's Leonard Post, and he
Oh, Leonard
subsequently
Post,
left
sure.
and became the chief in Salida. One of many people who have left Wheat Ridge and taken police chief positions around the state.
Yep.
So Leonard Post is on the left in the green shirt.
Yeah, that
Yes.
is Leonard by
And do we know who the other one is?
I don't know.
I can't really tell.
Okay. I got more.
Yeah.
So this is a briefing, and you see they're in the basement. The ceiling's about, I don't know, 6.5 feet tall is all. I recognize John Gallowich.
Gallowich there on
Yep.
Yeah.
This is John Gallowich. John worked at Wheat Ridge for a long time, was a lieutenant, and he retired, went to Gunnison, and he was just elected sheriff in the last
wow.
election. He was just sworn in, I think, yesterday maybe. Pretty amazing. I think this is Babini.
Yep, that's.
Yeah,
Wow.
Got to recognize the sideburns.
Yep.
And I don't know the others.
I think you got Daryl Whistler kneeling, writing something at the desk.
That's probably Daryl. Probably is.
I can't see the others
Is that
well
the
enough.
guy at the top?
No, that's too big, too tall
Too,
for.
too tall?
All right. So this is the 3rd municipal building. This is over at 44th and Owens. And that's what it looks like today. Right now it's abandoned, so we could get it back and get some more. Here we are at, this building was built in 1977. This is when it was first built. We've added on since then. Here's the remodel going on in 1995 that added on here to the east side of the building and what we look like today. So who's got other police department stories? 44th and Owens or anything?
What's
Well,
amazing?
I remember on the remodel to where we are today was there was many a day that the roof was being extended, so my office was right next to the wall that we were adding on to, and so there wasn't any roof over the top of my office. So I got to endure rainstorms and snowflakes and a variety of other weather conditions while I'd be sitting in my office doing my thing.
So my my training officer was Wade Hammond. He was here for an awful long time, a lot of years. And he talks about being hired at 44th and Owens, was there for 2 weeks, went to the academy, and when he came back from the academy, we had moved into this building. So he always associated his career with the age of this building. Here's our, Jack Bramble was, let me just talk about chiefs here for a minute. So here's Ed Pinson, who was the first official and paid police chief. And of course, Howard Jakeway sitting up here. Jack Hurst, our third chief. And here's what I was talking about. Dan Brennan, his hair was, more colorful then.
I thought mine looked pretty good.
Yeah, you got hair then.
Actually, most people don't understand that baldness is the cure for hair.
Yeah. So here's our first acting chief, Jack Bramble. Jack Bramble was one of our first council. He was on the first council and part of that group that incorporated the city. He was in World War II, and one of the things that he did was he taught military officers how to ride motorcycles. He was a motorcycle racer and knew a lot about motorcycles. When he got out of the war, moved back here to Wheat Ridge, he worked at Coors, and they found out that he was training people on motorcycles, so Jefferson County hired him to teach their officers how to ride motorcycles, and CSP, Colorado State Patrol, had him teaching them. So when he became a council person, I think the city founders came to him and they said, Jack, you know about law enforcement, so you be the first acting chief. And I don't know that if Jack knew anything about law enforcement. He knew about riding motorcycles. But it turned out he did a pretty good job. So he didn't get paid for doing this, started up the police department only for a few months before we had hired the first chief of Ed Pinson. So who knows about Jack Bramble? Go ahead.
Well, I think, no, you've told most of the things about him. I'm not so sure he wasn't associated with the reserves in some way with Jefferson County. Because when Kent and I started the first arson bureau and we wanted to do a stakeout one night, we went over to his house and picked up his El Camino, and it had a Jefferson County radio in it. So I think he may have had some association.
He was with the Jefferson County Motorcycle Patrol, Mounted Patrol, and they did all the funeral escorts and any events whatsoever in Jefferson County. Of course, they provided auxiliary service for that also. I mean, if there was a man that loved his Harley, it was Jack.
So here's Jack, and he bought the very first
Yeah.
police car. This is the first car. This is a 1969 Ford Custom 500, brand new at the time, and he bought that at 38th and Wadsworth. At that time, it was Johnny Harper Ford. It went through various names before, and many years until we finally were able to tear down that building and became pretty much an eyesore here in the last few years. And now we got beautiful economic growth there on that corner. But that's where that car came from. Here's Jack in 2005. So he came in. He had moved away. He had moved to the western slope. Came back in 2005, and we wanted to recreate that picture of him standing next to the police car. Unfortunately, Jack passed away just a couple of years after that. He suffered from dementia, and he didn't remember a lot about the old days, but he brought us his badge, and that was the badge that you saw at the beginning of the presentation. So we have the #1 badge for Wheat Ridge, and it's in the trophy cabinet that's in the police lobby right now. We've taken, for the 50th anniversary, we've done a ceremonial anniversary badge, we've taken a likeness of Jack Bramble's badge and put it into the center of this. So for this year, just for 2019, officers will wear this badge. We will all there's no rank designation on it. It's exactly the way Jack's badge was, and it's number 1. And everybody on the department is going to be number 1 for 2019. So we just think that was pretty cool. And here's a couple of chiefs together at that time. You remember meeting with Jack Bramble? Got a story to tell about that?
I think what I remember from Jack and his family actually just lived down the street from where I did at the time, was just his commitment to the community of Wheat Ridge. And I think, you've heard that from the people up here, that there was a real commitment that Wheat Ridge was a special place. There was a lot of history, although it had never been incorporated as a town or a city. There was a sense of community here, and I think that's what drove the incorporation of the community, and certainly the pride that those individuals took. So he was very impressed with how the police department had grown. It's a very small department when it first formed in 1969. A lot of growth in the city, a lot of growth in the metro area, which drove the growth of the police department. So he liked all the motorcycles, he liked the police cars and the technology, and a very, very interesting man.
So our first official chief was Ed Pinson. Here's Ed. He was hired as a sergeant. He was at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. He was a sergeant, was hired to be the first chief. Here he is with one of our old cars there. Yep. And this again, that's Pat Hopper again, in a different kind of uniform.
Yeah.
And we've got, anybody got a Pinson story? You want to do a Pinson story?
He was grumpy.
He was grumpy.
Yeah, he was. He was all business.
Ed was grumpy. He served on the fire board for quite a few years too, so I had the pleasure of serving with him, and oh boy, Ed took everything serious. I'll just tell you, I'll say that.
I remember one of the stories. So I was hired by Chief Pinson. He was only here for about 3 or 4 months before he retired, and I worked graveyards at the time. But I remember hearing stories about him and his about hats. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
You want to tell that one?
And haircuts. He was always bugging me about somebody's haircut. But yeah, you had to wear your hat at all times on duty, and your haircut had to be a certain length. And I recall that people complaining about that because longer hairstyles were kind of becoming the thing, and several officers wanted longer hairstyles. And my response to them was, cheer up, when longer hairstyles become the norm, you'll be required to have very short hair. I got that backwards. That happens with me a lot these days. That's all right.
I've got a hat story for you. There was a young lady who ran a stop sign at 38th and Upham. I stopped her right there by the Bradley gas station, which was directly across the street from the city offices in that L-shaped shopping center. So that was during the time where we were wearing hats. So I grabbed my hat, put it on, got my ticket book, and got out of the car. I went up to the car, got her driver's license and information, and I told her I'd be right back. Filled out the ticket, got up to the car, and she just started laughing. And that's all she could do was just start laughing. And about that time, the city administrator of the city, and I think that was John German, and Chief Pinson were driving by on their way to lunch. And as they drove by, they slowed down the car and they looked at me and just kept looking at me as they drove by. And so I went back so I asked the lady, I said, well, what are you laughing at? And she says, your hat's on backwards. So I knew why Chief Pinson and the city manager were looking at me. And so I said, well, I can't give you a ticket now. I mean, I just can't do that. So about 30 seconds after I cleared the call, I got a message to go see Chief Pinson. And I went to Chief Pinson's office, and he began telling me that there's a proper way to wear the hat, and that wasn't the way to wear it, was to wear it backwards. And so I told him, well, if we didn't have to wear these silly hats, then we wouldn't have had this problem. And he promptly dismissed me from my office, and from his office, and said, we don't need to be doing that anymore. So that was my little hat encounter with the chief.
It's 1970, and at that time, all of the patrol officers had an Instagram camera, with 110 film in it, so they could document any type of an accident. Of course, I was a wonderful guy that processed the film to maintain the chain of evidence. Well, I'm carrying some of this stuff back inside, and what's the dress in 1970? I had kind of quasi bell-bottom jeans on, I guess. I got read the riot act because I had bell-bottoms on from Pinson.
All right, we're up to the second chief of police. So Jake was chief from 1982 to 89. There's Jake, the picture that hangs in our lobby here. And he told that story about the recruit class, and they were hired by Jefferson County, and the sheriff walked in one day and told them, you're now Wheat Ridge officers or you don't have a job. So these are those 8 guys, and I got one of, there he is. There's Jake.
Oh my gosh.
I had slightly more hair then.
Slightly.
About 3 weeks after that class graduated, I had been down here for a couple of weeks, and we had what was a fairly casual field officer training program at that time, which consisted of spending a couple of weeks with a senior officer, and I was with Fred Girk. And then after that, we had a shift change, and I came into work one morning because my shift started at 6 a.m., and so I was there at 5:45, as you're supposed to be, for 15 minutes prior to your shift. And 10 of 6, nobody else shows up. 5 of 6, nobody else shows up. 6 o'clock, I go out and get in the police car, start driving around, and report it into the dispatch, which was then Jefferson County, and said, yes, Wheat Ridge 130, 131, and 132 in service, and started getting calls. Knew a little bit about what I was doing, but I won't say I knew a lot. And about 9 o'clock, things slowed down a little bit, and Lieutenant at that time, Jay Wallace, who had been a corporal at Jefferson County, called me into the office and scratching his head. I don't know what happened, but during the shift change, somehow the schedules worked out that it turns out I was the only one. Nothing terrible happened. I did almost put a whole bunch of juveniles in jail for what turned out to not, in fact, have been a crime, with a little bit more investigation, but that was another matter.
Here's Jake sitting at his desk, and here's something you don't see every day.
Cigarettes, yeah.
Yeah. It's just hard to believe that at one time we actually had ashtrays on desks. That tells you that this is early 80s right here. And I just had to throw that in. It's me getting an award from Jake there.
God, you were young.
I think I was 21.
Jeez.
Here's our third chief of police was Jack Hurst. There's Jack. Jack has he moved right after he retired from the Wheat Ridge Police Department. He moved to Nebraska, so he's hard to get a hold of now. He moved back there to be closer to his grandkids. But here he is inspecting the troops. There's Joe there with Jack Hurst. And Jack Chisholm on the other side there. There's Jack Hurst had a great sense of humor. He's a very entertaining guy. Here he is speaking at this very podium that I'm standing at. And this is our fourth chief of police. Here he is. So, Chief, what did you think about coming into Wheat Ridge there in the early days? I think here's your swearing in. It's another picture of me, but you know I collect them, so.
So, a couple of things. In my career at Lakewood, we had a number of officers that started their career at Wheat Ridge that had gotten their degrees and had come down to Lakewood. Lakewood required a 4-year degree, and what had always impressed me about those individuals, was their dedication and commitment to policing. They were really, really good people. So, over the years, I worked the north area of the city of Lakewood when I was in patrol and had interactions with different members of the department. And when the position opened, in 2004, my chief at the time had talked to me about the position, but there were a number of things that were going on in Wheat Ridge at the time that, were really attractive. You were starting to see a redevelopment in the city at that time, although it didn't happen. The city had brought in a large tract of land out on the west side of the city. It was going to be the future home of the Cabela's, and it just seemed, that a city that had been, fairly stable, but not experienced the growth that you saw in the surrounding metro area, was starting to find itself and take advantage of some opportunities to keep its small town values, but also increase the economic capacity in the area and do some innovative things with within the city, with redevelopment in certain areas. So it seemed like a really good place to come to. Certainly I knew it had really, really good people. There was that Wheat Ridge Lakewood dynamic. I remember when I got participated in the hiring process, they had brought all of the 5 finalists for the chief's job to a open house with the employees. And I'll never forget 2 employees who came up and chatted with me, really, really good conversation. And one of them said, "Hey, if you get the job, you're not going to Lakewoodize us, are you?" And I'd never heard Lakewood used as a verb. And I said, "Well, I don't think that I will, but I'll certainly bring what I think worked there to this organization." And I got offered the job, took it, and it's been a challenging but fun ride ever since then. The departments in the city has done a lot to enhance, and make better the police department. One of the first things we did was to get our salary and benefits so they were competitive with the rest of the metropolitan and Front Range area. the average citizen may not know this, but, the pool of applicants for policing has shrunk, and particularly in the last 6-7 years with all of the negative influence social media and national stories on on policing. So it was really important for us to be just as competitive as the Auroras, the Lakewoods, the Denvers, and the other jurisdictions. And we've had really great elected leadership that has recognized that and has been very supportive of the police department. When I came here, some people from the community might remember that the city went through some significant layoffs in the early 2000s, and the police department bore some of that. We had lost 10 positions, and in 2004, a number of individuals in this room, Jim, Joe, and other members of the department, helped the city bring forward a sales tax election, a 1-cent sales tax, which increased the city sales tax to 3%, which was still amongst the lowest in the metro area, to add some positions and to add 10 positions to the police department. So when I started on January 3rd of 2005, not only had the task of hiring those 10 officers, but we were also 8 positions down. So the department was really very lean at the time, and we were able over the years to get those positions added. We've since added 10 additional positions, and some really innovative, modern law enforcement policies and procedures. We're nationally accredited as a police department through the Commission on Accreditation. For law enforcement agencies, we're one of only 700 agencies internationally and nationally that is recognized with that distinction. And we have formed some great collaborative relationships with Jefferson County, with Lakewood and Arvada and Golden to share resources. We've got a regional communications center. We have a regional crime lab that we have access to today. We have a regional SWAT team that we share with Lakewood PD. So the sort of the islands or cities that existed, when Wheat Ridge was formed, that were sort of communities that were islands unto themselves, have recognized, particularly in Jefferson County, the power that comes with leveraging resources, both people and technology, to provide a better level of service. And it's, today I think Wheat Ridge is recognized as a premier law enforcement agency, certainly is recognized in the state. Its people are recognized in the state for their expertise and knowledge. And, I'm just really proud to lead the men and women of the Wheat Ridge Police Department.
Thanks. So 9 officers in 1969 make up the Wheat Ridge Police Department, and today 82 sworn as of January 1st. We increased a few more positions because of some economic growth that's going on here in the city. So it's kind of amazing, but I guess it's been 50 years. So that's anybody have any stories that we missed that you'd want to share with?
I have a fun story. We always all started out with wearing black Justin boots, didn't we? Spit and polished, okay? Right?
Wellingtons.
Yes, Wellingtons, yeah. The good stuff. Nice soft leather so you could walk in them for a day. Anyway, 69, 70, I was finishing a master's thesis at the Jefferson County Detention Center for Youth. And of course, I was comparing delinquent, non-delinquent children. Stupid me showed up one time doing interviews, and what was I wearing? Black boots. Everybody clammed up, shut up. They realized he isn't who he is. He's a cop. And that was it.
Dead giveaway.
Gave me away.
I would just tell you that, and the relationship exists today between police and fire here in Wheat Ridge, even with the consolidation of the fire Wheat Ridge with West Metro. But I got to tell you, in my history, I've seen all the conflict between police and fire on scene and things, the jurisdictional things, who the hell's in charge of this, who's in charge of that. I got to tell you, by the 6 or 7 firefighters that were also reserve officers, I think you can ask any of these fellows or the retired guys, the original 9, 10. We had the best relationship in the world, and to this day, Jake and Joe and Jim and I can just tell you, still the other guys that are alive that are retired, I'm still in touch with them on Facebook and things, see them occasionally. We just didn't have that problem. It was just super at the relationship police and fire had from the start. And I think the reserve, firefighter, the whole thing, we all admired each other, and it's not a problem of jurisdiction ever.
But we still had to, tell jokes about the fire department.
Oh, yes. And I can remember when Lakewood just started, and of course you had to have a bachelor's degree, and you were caught.
Did you wear one of those?
Did you wear one of those blazers?
I still have my blazer.
Oh, you still have your blazer?
Still have my light blue shirt.
Well,
I
one
only
of,
had to wear them to court then. But, Lakewood, one of the other stories that I heard, as like a young college student when I started at Lakewood was, the reason the two communities, incorporated, one was because Denver was encroaching into Jefferson County, and so people were worried about, their kids going to Denver schools. They were worried about being, part of a really, really large city. Jefferson County had a really great reputation, their school district did, and so folks didn't want to lose that. And there was a serial rapist that was preying on, the garage rapist would prey on young women who, had just pulled into their garage, maybe getting their groceries out, and would attack them. And there were sexual assaults occurred in Wheat Ridge and also in Lakewood. So public safety was a big component of that whole incorporation effort. In Lakewood, it was kind of funny because they, when they formed, when Tom Ritchie, the mayor, was their first mayor, was part of that incorporation group, public safety was so important that, they committed to having the best, police department. They wanted to have the best police department, and they hired their police chief before they ever hired a city manager or any other department director. And that person was Ron Lynch, who was an academic. That was mostly his background. And then subsequently, shortly thereafter, Pierce Brooks. So Pierce Brooks was had been a division chief with the Los Angeles PD. Was renowned for a couple of books, The Onion Field, which was a story of a pretty brutal homicide of a LAPD detective. And the second detective escaped, but it went through the whole chronology of how this occurred and the suspect and subsequently what happened to the surviving officer and the court case. But then he also wrote Officer Down Code 3, which had the basic 10 tenets of officer safety, because officer safety, if you remember, in the 60s and 70s was sort of a growing area. So as part of that, in 1969, President Lyndon Johnson and Congress had formed the first criminal or law enforcement review committee to look at law enforcement as we came out of the riots and, the 60s and Vietnam, to say how can we make law enforcement better in the United States, and lots of recommendations. One of those is that officers would be encouraged to get 4-year degrees, that they'd be called agents, just like FBI agents because they had a college degree, and that we needed to soften our image, and thus the more of the business suit attire. So I didn't have to, but I heard stories of guys out directing traffic with their blazers on and business suits and a police helmet. And community was really confused. So, by 1984 and then 1985, they went to more of the traditional blue uniform, and have had that ever since. They're still called agents because they have the college degrees. But the remarkable thing, I think, in all of that, was over the years, from my perspective, being in law enforcement now, going on to 42 years. When I got into the business, every community was an island unto itself, and you didn't really share information cross-jurisdictionally. Everybody dealt with their own problems, and with the growth that we've seen in the state and the Front Range and the metro area, that's really changed. In particular, it's changed in Jefferson County. It's not just Lakewood and Wheat Ridge and Arvada and part of Westminster, Golden, and the sheriff's office. We train our people almost the same way. We send our people all to the same academy, a regional academy. They're all trained the same way. They develop really, really great relationships. And I tell people this because so many of our agencies in Jefferson County are nationally accredited, that you could drive from Littleton, through Arvada, into unincorporated Jefferson County, and the level of law enforcement that you'll experience, the professionalism, the commitment and dedication of the men and women that work for those agencies is almost the same. And we've come a long way in that 50 years since a lot of our cities have been incorporated.
Thanks, Chief.
I hate to say this, but this humor, lots of times the undertone was, well, is that an officer or is that a member of the Lakewood Glee Club? With the Blazers.
They were really good speakers, too.
We had a lot of humorous things. One thing that I would like to say, because it reflects the philosophy that I've always had, and that is that a community gets the level of law enforcement that it deserves. And therefore, Wheat Ridge must be a very deserving community. I will tell you that after I left here and after I got through working in the pension area, went back into law enforcement, I was working fugitive. And in doing so, I worked with a multi-jurisdictional agency that had both federal, state, county, and municipal officers assigned to it. And the one thing that I consistently heard was that we're not so sure about you, but those other people from Wheat Ridge are really good people. The level of acknowledgement of this agency was always a very heartening thing to me, and I can tell you that I have a great deal of pride over having been associated with it for the many years that I have.
Thanks, Jake. Hey, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that we have the current mayor of the city of Wheat Ridge right here, Mr. Bud Starker. Came and I think, still a couple of shots of the chief there. Here's the entire police department in the middle of Panorama Park in 1971.
Cool.
Gets a little bigger in 74. We've got a motorcycle. We got a animal control van in the back there. And this is what we call the Millennium photograph. So remember when everybody thought that the world was going to end in the year 2000? All our computers were going to explode or whatever. We worked 12-hour shifts. We divided the department into 2 shifts. So everybody worked. And at midnight, we all got together and took that picture there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Neat.
Here's our patches over the course of time. We started out with just a rocker over the Jefferson County patch. It became a Wheat Ridge patch, but it was still green, and then it turned to blue. This is what we call the 25-year mistake. So one of our lieutenants, we ran out of patches. We needed to order more patches, and he found an outlet in Taiwan. This is before the internet, and ordered 5,000 of these patches. Came back like this. So you can see it has the basic shape on the inside there, but it has this outer layer that law enforcement agencies near us, and Lakewood, I think, was one, that started calling us the Peanut Patrol. But we had 5,000 of them, and we didn't want them to go to waste, so we used them until they ran out. About year 2000, we went to this patch. Now, this is our current one that kind of incorporates elements of everything. It's got Wheat Ridge in Colorado, the state seal. It says established in 1969, something that we're pretty proud of. And here's another thing that we're kind of proud of. So this is the very first police car. You saw a picture of it earlier. Here it is with Jack Bramble. This car we still have, and it lived over at our city shops, you know, for the last 50 years, looking like this.
Oh my God.
And about March of last year, we started working on it. And so we have we've redone the interior. This is what the interior looked like then. And
It looked like when we went on patrol.
yeah. And this is where it is right now. This is over at the body shop right now, and the interior is finished. We'll be finishing up the paint and body on it, and putting the lights and decals back on it, and it should be parade worthy in a month or two. So we'll have that ready for the Carnation Festival and other events that occur over the course of this year. And we've got folks in the back that are selling our passports. This is one of the ways that we try to fund this endeavor is to sell the coupon books. So we've got those back there if anybody's interested in looking at those, and we'll probably hit you up. Here again, here's Jack Bramble's badge alongside the new 50th anniversary badge. So now, I think, it's your turn. If you have any questions for us, if you'd like to tell a story or something that you might remember about the police department, who has one? You have to talk in the microphone, and you have to watch your language because we're on TV.
I want to ask a question, and Howard, you might be the one that can answer this. You were talking about the districting in Wheat Ridge, and if you recall, when we were on the fire department as volunteers, the Arvada area, I always thought it was a strange dynamic. We would not take the fire trucks past Clear Creek, but the ambulance that we ran out of the barn would go into Arvada. What was the reasoning for that, or do either one of you know?
It was real simple. The city paid for the ambulance with the agreement that we would run it. So therefore, the ambulance had to service the city limits, not the district. That's why. Correct. And of course, the district lines were drawn between Wheat Ridge and Arvada long before I-70 existed also, which created another barrier.
So we just taught you everything that you ever wanted to know. And you're speechless now, right?
Hello. You may have gone over this earlier. Sorry if I missed it, but just can you kind of describe how many people you had when you first got started? I wasn't able to count them on that picture up there, but how many officers you had and what kind of resources you had at the very beginning compared to what you have today?
Resources at the beginning.
13 officers.
13.
13
You know, and-
officers total, counting the chief, one secretary. That was the staff of the police department.
You know, and prior, when Jack was acting chief, I mean, the force was deputies that were off duty, and we would hire them on an hourly basis. And then they would do the patrol, and all they basically had was a change of uniform. But we would hire the off-duty officers. And some of the original corps, even preceding what became the recruitment class, were gleaned by Jack and others and the mayor as the prime officers to consider, because we could, in essence, employ them for short terms of periods, a shift or two, and then if you saw qualities in that individual, then they would encourage them to apply.
Right, so the incorporation papers said that, all right, we incorporated August 20th, 1969. You've got 100 days to create services. And that's what they did over that first 100 days was how do you create services? Immediately they started a contract with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Within that 100 days, they had established the police department with the original 9 that has grown to 82 now is what.
You know, and as a sidebar, Ed Anderson, the mayor, encroached on me to go to Inglewood, it was Inglewood, Littleton, one other police department, and solicit from them their position descriptions and their operational procedures so that we could start to write position descriptions for officers that Jack could in fact implement once we had officers on hand that we would hire, because you're starting from scratch. You have nothing. I mean, you think about one day you're part of the county, the next day, and you have that 100-day window where you need to create what ordinances do you need, what zoning laws do you need, what kind of staff do you need, how are you going to succeed in doing this, and then on top of that, you have no funding. You're not going to get any money from mill levy taxes for a year. Now, they did institute a 1% sales tax, and best to my knowledge, that was 1969 instead of 70 after the election. And the reason why is that, you know, I showed Jim, it was on the side of a file cabinet from my dad's drugstore, and he shut the store down in 69, and there it said, Wheatridge City Tax, 1%. And so maybe that was the first form of revenue coming into the city. But every bit of this needed to be done somehow and funded. And I laugh because it's a leap of faith, because most of the things that we do, we formulate around what? A budget. We think about how much it's going to cost first before we do it. And instead, they thought about how can we incorporate this city? How can we succeed in becoming a city? And then, oh my gosh, we're a city. Now how are we going to do it? In other words, the reverse. And I mean, there was some incredible, incredible men out there that did it, and women. It was just incredible.
All right, well, it's been a pleasure. Stick around. We've got some cake in the back. That's always great. Have some cake. Talk to our panel members, and like I said, we'll try to do more events over the course of this year. We really focused on, the beginning of the police department. There's a lot of stories we could tell. We didn't even touch on crime or some of the scary things that have happened in Wheat Ridge, some of the good things. So there's lots more stories to tell. And if you're interested in this, let us know, and we'll see what we can put together for another time. So thanks very much.
How did you get